You guys, welcome to Pistons Talk Podcast Postgame Show. Hope you guys are having a great Saturday night. Just got done watching the Detroit Pistons versus the Orlando Magic game. Before we get into this podcast, quick favor, if you guys are watching live on YouTube, make sure when you're coming in and watching to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you aren't already. It does really help out the YouTube channel, push out our content to you guys with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you are an audio listener, you just listen to the podcast on the audio side, make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you do get your podcast. We're on basically every podcast platform you can think of. But let's get into this game, you guys. We're going to go over these quarter notes that I do take during the game. And from just the jump of this game, this felt like a playoff game. This felt like a game that the Pistons had circled on their calendar. Now, if you remember, the last time the Detroit Pistons played the Magic was the game that Cole Anthony broke Jaden Ivey's leg. And I don't know if, the Detroit Pistons players had that circled as, kind of getting a game for JI back. But man, this game was just scrappy. The game was like 10-5, and there was like 6 minutes left in the first quarter. It gave you some like early mid 2000 like vibes of just the way it was officiated, really defensive. No one was really scoring. But eventually these teams, started making more baskets. Asar Thompson's defense was just everywhere. He was giving players like Paulo Banchero a really tough time. Same with Franz Wagner and other players. And the way he scored tonight is just right place, right time, hustle points, cutting, getting offensive rebounds, making sure, he got some putback points in that sense. He's had 2 back-to-back games where he's looked really good, and I have noticed that they are letting him play closer to that 30-minute per game mark, which I think is good. I think his minute restriction will eventually be lifted by the Pistons, because if you guys do remember, he had blood clots, and he came back about a month ago. So the Pistons, medical staff has been very careful with how long they're playing him and how long he's been able to be out there. But the past 2 games, I'm feeling very confident with Asar Thompson. He makes his defense so much better, but did want to shout him out, especially in the first quarter. I thought he was huge. And Beasley hitting his threes, being that veteran, talking shit to the crowd. Holland, I thought, was very impactful too in this game. Pistons dropped 30 points in the first quarter to the Magic's 18, and that was the score after 12 minutes. Going into the second quarter, I don't know what it was, but the Orlando Magic kept trying to dunk on Isaiah Stewart. Multiple players. Franz Wagner tried it twice. Paulo tried it a couple of times, but Stu was just like really protecting the paint. Obviously, if you look at the box score, he didn't score a whole lot, but defensively, I thought he did what he's been doing throughout the season, and just being like a rim protector, being a switchable big, and bringing energy off the bench. Holland was hitting his 3-point shots, getting to the basket, getting to the free throw line. And I thought it was, pretty crucial, because this game was back and forth. It wasn't a game where, the Pistons had that lead and the Magic would go away. I mean, the Magic went on a 15-4 run in the second quarter. And once the starters came in, it really felt that like the energy wasn't the same with the reserves. And it's something that I can't say that I've had a conversation about so far this year. Usually it's when the starters come in, they keep a lead, but the starters just, I don't know, the flow of the game was really weird in the second quarter. The Magic turned it up defensively, and they were getting to the free throw line. I'm sure we'll talk about the officiating after we're done with this podcast. But to end the second quarter, the Magic surge, and it was 54-53 your Detroit Pistons. Coming out of halftime, which I didn't see the play initially until FanDuel brought it up on the broadcast. Tobias Harris got hit in the head by Paulo Banchero. There was no foul call, obviously, and he tried to play in the second half, I should say, but you could tell he was concussed. You could tell it just wasn't there, so he had to come out. So we had no Tobias Harris in the second half. And Paulo just went on a rampage. He was getting to mid-range. He was getting to the free throw line, and he's a really good player. The Magic are finally healthy. I think they said in the broadcast, it's the first time this year where, all their starters have played, I think 6 times this season. And like when they're healthy, they're a very scrappy, hard team to beat. But the Pistons really didn't go away in the third. I mean, Sarr kept them into the game. They played more in transition, which I felt like the Magic did a really good job in the second quarter, keeping the Pistons more of a half-court team. But coming out of halftime, the Pistons were looking for more running opportunities, and I felt like that's why they regained the lead from the Magic. But the foul trouble, too, which I can't really solely blame on the players. I thought the officiating as a whole, not just for the Detroit Pistons, but just as a whole, probably one of the worst games I've seen this season, where the refs were just whistle happy. Like the flow of the game for the Pistons and the Magic tonight, I felt like the refs got involved when they didn't need to get involved. They had no control of the game. JB got ejected. Multiple technical fouls, like probably the worst officiated game of the season for the Detroit Pistons. But to end the third quarter, the Pistons have an 81-79 lead. Now, I think the fourth quarter, this is where the Pistons lost the game. Now, I think from a rotation standpoint, JB wanted to give Cade Cunningham some rest, and 100% agree. Cade played, I think, 38 minutes tonight out of 48. You got to get Cade some rest. But Orlando took full advantage of Cade not being out there. It was Marcus Sasser and all the starters minus Tobias Harris. And the Magic go in a 9-0 run. And we did not guard them on the three-point line. Our perimeter defense was really bad about the first 3 or 4 minutes going into this fourth quarter. And the Magic get a lead, 14, 15-point lead. And I felt like when Cade got back into the game, the defense was still really aggressive by Orlando. There was a play in particular I'm sure we'll talk about where Cade shoots a three, goes to get the offensive rebound, and he basically gets shoulder tackled by Jalen Suggs, goes right to the first row. And there's a referee right there. He didn't call shit. But the Pistons tried to get back into this game. They cut the deficit from a 15-point lead all the way down to 4 points at one point in this fourth quarter, but they just could not get defensive stops. The referees were just blowing the whistle a lot in the second half, and the Pistons eventually do lose to the Magic 121-113. They finished the week 2-1. Obviously, if you can finish the week winning at a 66% rate, you'll take it. Obviously, it would have been great to finish this week 3-0, but this definitely had some playoff implication feels. This felt like a playoff game, and I was thinking to myself, and we'll get to comments and questions after this thought, you guys. I was thinking of 3 teams, and the 3 teams I thought of that are just probably going to be bloodbaths for the Pistons in the playoffs. If they keep this trajectory up and they're playing around like 500 basketball from a week-to-week basis, the Orlando Magic and the Pistons, I think, in the playoffs would be scrappy. I mean, we've seen these teams play each other. The Magic have beat the Pistons twice this year. Pistons beat them once. The New York Knicks and the Pistons, I think, would be a great playoff series as well. Pistons have beat them twice. The Knicks have beat us once. And the Indiana Pacers. Those are the three teams in the East where I'm thinking, like, man, if the Pistons match up with these teams in the playoffs, it is just going to be fireworks in the first round, because all three of those teams have one thing in common with the Pistons: they just don't like them, and I love it. I love the scrappiness. I love the defensive um, battles that the Pistons have brought to each and every game. It feels like they have a chance to win every game. It never feels like they're out of it. But those are the three teams I'm thinking, as we get closer to this trading deadline, and we're at the halfway mark of the season, and I think we have a pretty good indication of what this Detroit Pistons team is going to be. But let me know what you guys think of those three teams. I think if the Pistons matched up with any of those teams in the playoffs, I think it would definitely get those NBA ratings up, to say the least. But I do want to get into some comments and questions with you guys, like we usually do with these post game podcasts. So if you are new here, I open up the show for all you guys watching live right now on YouTube, and we do a Q&A section for the next 20 or so minutes, and whether it's a therapy session, you guys want to let it out, you want to talk about the game, maybe the trading deadline, maybe there's topics that you'd like to discuss. The floor is open, so drop your comments. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we get back, you guys, we'll answer any comments, questions, and overall thoughts with this game. Okay, guys, we're back. We're gonna answer your questions. You guys dropped some really good comments with this post game show, so let's get into them real quick. So let's take a quick sip of water. But one of the first questions that we have on this post game show comes from MB Well. Shout out. Said, I'm starting to test the magic. First, they busted Ivy's leg. Now they smashed Tobias' head. Okay, so this is a venting kind of comment, and hey, I'm here for it. I will say with the Magic, they play very rough and tough physical basketball. And here's the thing, MB Well, I'm okay with teams playing physical. What I'm not okay with is when it's reckless. The Tobias play was obviously not on purpose. Paulo was going up for a score. Tobias was right in the restricted area. Paulo goes up for a shot, and Tobias got a elbow to the head inadvertently. Like it wasn't on purpose. Now the Ivy play, you could have a conversation. You could have a debate whether or not Cole Anthony purposely or that was a dirty play on Ivy. The one play I brought up earlier was the Cade Cunningham play in the fourth quarter. Now, if you guys haven't seen it, I did go and post it on my Twitter feed. If you guys do want to follow us over on Twitter at Pistons Talk with 2 underscores. Cade shot a 3-pointer, went to go get the offensive rebound. Jalen Suggs basically tackled him, took his legs out from under him, and Cade went flying into the first row. That's the play where I'm like, that's a reckless play. You shouldn't try to take a player out like that. And it felt dirty. It didn't feel necessary. The Magic are a very, tough physical team. That's their trait. They have guys on their roster that you hate playing, but you probably love on your basketball team. Like, Franz Wagner is just an irritant, but I'd be lying to you if I said I wouldn't like him on the Pistons, because I feel like he would be such a good piece on the Pistons. But watching him, I get irritated watching the antics, the foul baiting, the whining to the referees. But he's a good basketball player. But yeah, the Magic have a good team when they're healthy. It's just the way they play. I think some fans, not even just Pistons fans, I saw it on my timeline as I was posting all these altercations tonight. A lot of NBA fans don't like the Magic. They call them dirty. They call them, whiners, which I wasn't really aware of tonight. But just know as Pistons fans, there are other NBA fan bases that don't like what the Orlando Magic do either. But thank you for the comment, MB. Well, appreciate it as always, man. I have a comment from the original 123 kid. These refs are ridiculous tonight. This had to be a record for technical fouls in one game. I do have the ESPN box score pulled up. I don't know if it is the record, but I know there was quite a few. Let me see how many technical fouls there was. So there was 6 technical fouls, 4 for the Pistons, 2 for the Magic, which is quite a few. Usually you might get a technical foul or 2. But if you just want to talk about fouls in general, so the Pistons had 25 fouls, and the Magic had 23 fouls. I mentioned it at the top of the podcast. I felt like the referees just had no control of this game tonight. I felt like this was a scrappy game, and the only way they felt that they could get the game back into order, in a sense, was just blow the whistle. Because these are 2 teams that are very physical. These are 2 teams that have enforcers. Obviously, Isaiah Stewart is ours. And with Orlando, you have Jonathan Isaac, who's a good rim protector, really tough guy. Paulo Banchero as well. Just a really, it reminded me of like a throwback, mid-2000s game where, it's just hard-nosed defense, a lot of fouls. Like, refs had no order of this game. But I don't know if this is a record. I'm sure someone could probably look it up as we're recording this live on YouTube. But it did feel like there was a lot of technical fouls in this basketball game. But I do appreciate you dropping a comment, as always, original. Wanted to get to Wheezy. What happened? I seen Franz and Paulo carried to our offense. I turned it off at half. So I think the biggest thing with this game, Wheezy, is, coming out of halftime, the third quarter was okay. It was back and forth. But the main reason why I felt the Pistons lost this game was their inability to, secure defensive rebounds. The Magic got quite a few. At times, it felt like the ball was sticking for the Pistons. It wasn't, moving side to side like it was in the first quarter. They weren't really sharing the basketball, but you have to credit the Magic's defense. The Magic suffocate you, picking you up like at half court. So the Pistons really couldn't get, in a groove, get in a rhythm. I felt watching the game, and then, the start of the fourth quarter is, I thought, really like the nail in the coffin. The Magic just got hot from 3, and we weren't guarding them in the perimeter. And I think that's the main reason why that the Pistons lost tonight. But, when you have Franz and Paulo shoot, over 50%, like that, it's going to be really hard to beat them, because that's a 1-2 punch that I think when healthy, they're one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. Got a comment from Dominique. It's cool playing hard and hustling, but the Magic players play reckless to the point of risking injuring the opposing players. I know we talked about this a couple seconds ago. I agree, Dominique. Some of the plays that they made tonight, I felt that were a little obsessive. especially the Cade play. Like I'm still playing that in my head. Like that was similar to like what took Jaden Ivey out. It was a similar type of tackle. Basically, it felt like a football play. But yeah, like some of the plays I just I wasn't a fan of. And with the amount of fouls we got, that should have that easily could have been a flagrant two, because that was not a basketball play. That was just a reckless play. Pistons should get Bobby Portis if they're involved of a multiple trade. If the Bucks are involved now, we'll probably talk about this tomorrow on the podcast. We're having a friend of the show, Corey Wood, since he's no longer covering the Lions because they're not in the playoffs. I'm going to have him on the podcast tomorrow. But there's been a lot of rumors with Jimmy Butler and a 4 or 5 team trade. We'll get into this tomorrow, Maurice. But yeah, I mean, if the Bucks want to give the Pistons Bobby Portis, if they want to land a Bradley Beal or something like that, yeah, sure. I think he definitely does make sense for this team. I do want to get to a couple more, comments and questions with you guys. I see that you left about 37 if you are watching live on YouTube right now. With how the Pistons are looking right now, I feel the Pistons need a number 2 and a number 3 guy at backup point guard. Great observation, Chris. I agree with you. The thing is, it's like the more you read with the Pistons, let me fix my chair because it keeps falling down and it looked like a floating head. I apologize, you guys. Like getting a number 2, I think would really help the Pistons. The problem is when you're talking about getting like a real number 2 option, it's probably going to cost you. Like you're talking guys like a CJ McCollum, a Zach LaVine, a Brandon Ingram, an Anthony Simons, like guys of that caliber, right? Or even Jordan Poole to an extent. He's having a better season in Washington this year. I think all of those guys would definitely cost the Pistons some assets. Obviously, all those guys I named in terms of like trade pieces, prospects, draft picks, I don't think they're all equal. I think when you're talking about, the highest guys that you'd have to pay out to get, it's probably LaVine. LaVine's trade value, I would say, is a lot higher than it was last year because 1, there's 1 less year in his contract, and 2, he's playing really good basketball right now. Even though the Bulls are the 10 seed, Zach LaVine is having a very good season. Now, all the other guys I named, CJ McCollum. Now, what do the Pelicans do? I'm not really sure. Do they want to sell off on some of their guys? Do they want to sell off on a Zion Williamson? Probably not. Brandon Ingram, from what I've listened to from other NBA media members podcast, he has 0 to very little trade value, and no team in the NBA wants to touch it because he's not available. I do agree with you. Getting a number 2 guy, I think, is needed. Don't know how realistic it is, because if you listen to other podcasts or read other articles, I think the message has been pretty consistent with the Pistons. Like, they're willing to be buyers, but they're not willing to be buyers to sacrifice the future. They're not going to skip steps. They're not just going to get I'll just say Zach LaVine just so they could get up to a 6 seed and maybe, host a first round playoff series. Trajan has been very consistent with his message in terms of what he wants to do. And he mentioned not skipping steps. Now, could they get a number 2? Sure, but I'm not really sure what it would actually be. A backup point guard, I think, is very realistic. I think with you watched the game tonight, Marcus Sasser struggled. He only played 10 minutes tonight. I think he scored 2 points. We've been saying it all season long. If the plans for Marcus Sasser is to be a backup point guard, and that's something you're trying to develop him into, cool. But nights like tonight really showed if you're going to be playing a great defensive team like Orlando is, you're going to need a guy that is more comfortable with the ball in his hands. And obviously, not having Jaden Ivey out there hurts because Jaden Ivey could be that number 2 option. Jaden Ivey could be a guy that could be a secondary ball handler, but he's not going to be available because he's injured. He's got a broken fibia, and I don't think he's coming back this year. I'd be very surprised if he did. I think the backup point guard market is still going to be very interesting. I think we've talked about guys like a Malcolm Brogdon, Alonzo Ball, Mike Conley. I think those are names that are a little bit more obtainable for the Pistons. I think all those options make sense, but it really depends what those teams want to do with the deadline too. There could be buyout markets as well. There could be some, veterans that signed with contending teams and it's just not working out for them. Maybe they like to, come in the East where it's a little bit weaker. But I do think this trading deadline, Chris, will be very interesting to say. I'm not really sure what the Pistons are going to do. It seems like they're kind of dipping their toe in the water. In one sense, they're like, we'll be buyers, but we'll only be buyers for like the right piece. And the other breath, it's just like, well, we'll help you facilitate if you give us stuff. So it's just like they're being very careful of what they're doing. Like if they wanted to go all in, they probably would have, traded for like a Levine or an Ingram or stuff like that. But I really wouldn't expect like fireworks at the deadline. It might be kind of just like under the radar moves, kind of like Fontecchio last year. Like Fontecchio came out of nowhere. No one was really talking about Simone Fontecchio. And he was like a really sneaky acquisition for the Pistons at the time. But I appreciate the question, Chris. It'll be really interesting to see like what does happen. I do want to get into a couple more questions with you guys. Chuck makes a really good point. Even when Ivy returns, we still need a backup point guard. That's true. Like, you never signed one, and you're hoping that Marcus Sasser can develop into one. And I'm not trying to, shit on Marcus Sasser because I think throughout the season he's made strides. He's developed so much since the summer league of when the Pistons were, using him as a backup guard in the summer league. I think he's taken strides in development of trying to be a backup point guard, but you can tell like when they play him off ball more, he seems way more natural, way more comfortable playing kind of off guard. And obviously, with the amount of shooting guards that we have on this team, with like a Beasley, with the Hardaway, it was going to be really hard for him to get, playing time. So he's forced to play backup point guard. But I do agree with you, Chuck. We still need a backup point guard. We're about 2 weeks away from the trade deadline being over on February 6th. I still see them being active. I see them addressing needs. I think, adding a backup guard is so huge, a secondary ball handler for this basketball team, because if this team does have playoff aspirations, they want to make some noise in the playoffs. They want to host a first round, playoff series. Addressing the backup point guard, I think, is something that should be, priority one. They need to look at the market for that. Are there other areas on this team that need to be filled? Sure. I'm not expecting that at one trade deadline. I'm just not. I think the Pistons are being very careful of what they do. They want to see what happens with Jimmy Butler. They want to see what happens with Zach LaVine if he does get moved. What happens with Bradley Beal? Because they have cap space, and I think a lot of teams will definitely be reaching out to them to help facilitate deals. They have $14 million in cap space. They have an available roster spot. This trade deadline is really weird. I like, if you ask me today what they're going to do, my gut would tell me they would facilitate and help, Jimmy Butler, get to Phoenix somehow. And then might get a player and a couple of picks back. But that's today. Like, it could change next week. I could feel like they're just going to be aggressive and go get a backup guard. But I really don't know what they're going to do with this deadline. But I do agree, getting someone like a backup point guard, Chuck, I think should be their first priority, especially if they want to make a playoff run. I really I really think so. Wheezy, am I being childish for thinking Killian Hayes is better than Anthony Black? Now, so I actually want to like talk about this for a couple of minutes because I saw a lot of Pistons fans today on Twitter because Killian had a monster game in the G League. I think he had like 25 and 18 assists or something crazy like that. A lot of Pistons fans were saying like, should we have a reunion? Which I'm like, listen, I wish Killian well, nothing but the best, but I don't think you should bring him back. But to answer your question, are you being childish for thinking Killian is better than Anthony Black? I could see why you think that. Anthony Black is very raw offensively. I think the only difference is Anthony Black can finish with both of his hands. Killian is still very, right hand dominant. He does not like finishing with his left hand at all. Even in the G League, he still will not even dribble or even try to, switch hands when he gets to the lane. But yeah, I can see why you think that. Like Anthony Black, for what it's worth, good defender, but he really just can't shoot. Even though he did hit open three, that's something that he does need to work on. Can't trade Beasley. He's too good. I don't think they'll trade Beasley, but I think retaining him might get a little interesting this summer. I don't think you're going to be able to, give him that $7 million that does come with. I can't remember if it's the MLE they can offer him, which I think they can offer. The most they can offer Beasley is 14, from what I read. 14 million a year, which I think if you're Malik Beasley, it's obviously a pay upgrade, but I think what the thing that a lot of fans don't understand, or maybe they do and they don't want to have this conversation, we don't have his bird rights. Send a 1-year deal. So, I mean, there are other teams out there that could possibly offer Beasley more in free agency and you might lose him. But he seems like the type of guy that may like to be here long term. He seems like he's really embraced being a Detroit Piston. He's a locker room favorite. He's a fan favorite. I'd really like to keep him personally. But at the end of the day, I think, keeping him at the deadline, I think is something that the Pistons will do. Want to get into like one more comment. This comes from Wheezy again. The fans don't want Holland and Nassar starting with Cade. They prefer Tim Hardaway Jr. and Beasley to help Cade with his all-star numbers instead of winning. Okay. This is an interesting comment. I think the main reason why they start Tim Hardaway Jr. is because of spacing purposes. Obviously, Ron Holland is getting more confident with his shot. I think he's shooting 36% from three in the month of January. And he shot 41% from three in the month of December. So Ron Holland's shot is getting more consistent, which you love to see first year, because I think the knock on him, coming out of the draft was not really known as a shooter, but Ron has developed and he's not scared to shoot it. And I love that. Now with the Asar's had, back-to-back games where he looks really good, playing on both ends really well. I think the reason why they prefer to start THJ and have Beasley out there with Cade is just for spacing purposes. Now, if Ron and Asar were league average, I would say, just league average, like around, 33, 35% from three, you would see Ron Holland and Asar with Cade. I don't think it's there for his all-star numbers. I don't think it's like that. But at the end of the day, you want to have as much spacing around Katie Cunningham as you possibly can, because if you watch the 14-win Pistons last year, there was no spacing out there. But at the end of the day, I could see why you think that. But we're going to wrap up this podcast. We've been on for about 35 minutes. We will see you guys tomorrow. I'm going to be having Corey Woods on from M Live, talking about the Pistons, talking about, trade deadline, all-star stuff, and much more. So if you guys want to, catch us tomorrow at 7 o'clock, we'll be doing a longer form podcast, probably like an hour and a half. Don't really know, but appreciate you guys, coming on. We've got 63 of you guys in here right now. So if you could do us a favor on your way out, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you aren't already. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Peace.